Luke and Acts, Unlocking the Bible by David Pawson. Introduction. The Bible is made up of the words of man and the word of God. Many human authors, but one divine editor. Most of the authors were responding to an immediate need and had no idea that what they were writing would one day be part of the Bible. We can therefore study the books of the Bible at two levels, the historical and the existential. On the historical level we ask, why was it written? What was the human reason behind it? On the existential level, we ask, why is it in our Bible? Why does God want us to know about this? This will be our method as we consider both the Gospel of Luke and the Book of Acts later on. The two books have the same author, and together they make a rather special case. So who was Luke, and why did he write these two volumes? Who was Luke? Number 1, a Gentile. Luke is unique amongst all the authors in the Bible because he is the only Gentile. His English name comes from the original Lucas, and he was a native of Antioch in Syria, which was the Paris of the ancient world at the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea, well north of the Promised Land. It was at Antioch that the first Gentile church was established, and the followers of Jesus Christ were first called Christians, a somewhat disparaging nickname given to them by the locals who noted that they sought to follow Christ. While this name has become popular today and has a wide range of definitions, in Acts the words believer or disciple were commonly preferred. Luke was well placed as a Gentile to show through his writing how the gospel spread from Jerusalem to Rome. We can easily forget that it is a unique thing for a religion to jump ethnic barriers, especially from being essentially Jewish to becoming largely Gentile. Most people are born into their national religion and stay there. Here is a religion which has jumped from one people to another. This focus on Gentile readers is demonstrated in a number of ways. For example, Luke avoids the Hebrew and Aramaic expressions like rabbi and Abba used in Matthew and Mark, preferring to translate such words into Greek for his readers to make sure that they understand. Number 2, a doctor. Luke was a doctor by profession. The Apostle Paul refers to him as the beloved physician when writing to the Colossians church. Medicine had been developing for 400 years, and doctors received careful training. Luke needed to be observant, analytical, and careful in his records, skills which he also uses in writing his Gospel and the Book of Acts. There are many incidents which betray Luke's medical background. The birth of Jesus, for example, is told from Mary's angle. We have the details of Jesus' circumcision, mention of the swaddling clothes or diapers, all the kind of things a doctor would be interested in. Incidentally, Luke gives us Mary's genealogy to trace Christ's physical ancestry, while Matthew gives us Joseph's line. When Mark describes the sickness of Peter's mother-in-law, he calls it simply a fever. Luke writes of a high fever. Of the miracles which Luke records, 5 out of 6 are miracles of healing. God uses a doctor to report the supernatural. The virgin birth, the miracles of Jesus, and the signs and wonders in the Book of Acts all come from Luke's pen. Some doctors are skeptical about anything which is outside the natural, physical realm, but Luke is able to bring his considerable skill as a writer and physician to record what actually took place, even when it was outside medical knowledge or ability. Number 3, a historian. Luke was meticulous in his detail, wording and grasp of cultural nuisances. Not an apostle himself, he was dependent for his knowledge of Jesus on those who were close to him. Some modern historians have criticised his writing, claiming that he was mistaken, but subsequent archaeological findings have always found in favour of Luke, to the point where he is now recognised as one of the finest historians of his day. Indeed, if we treat Gospel as a different genre from history, as suggested earlier, then Luke is the only history writer in the New Testament. His primary objective was to provide an accurate and reliable account of what had been said and done in the life of Jesus, rather than announce the good news of salvation, though there was bound to be an overlap between the two. Number 4. A traveller. Luke was also a very experienced traveller. It is Luke who refers to the Sea of Galilee as a lake. It is only 13 kilometres long and 8 kilometres wide. To a seasoned traveller, this would certainly be merely a lake. He travelled with the Apostle Paul, indicated by the so-called we passages in Acts. Luke remains anonymous, similar to other New Testament writers, seeking to divert attention away from himself, but the use of we betrays the fact that he was there. Luke was Paul's travelling companion, especially when Paul was at sea, on the voyage from Troas to Philippi, Philippi to Jerusalem, and Caesarea to Rome. Maybe Paul felt the need of a physician when he sailed. Some of Luke's finest writing depicts the voyages towards the end of Acts and the eventual wreck of the shores of Malta. This willingness to travel is a significant factor in our understanding of how Luke's Gospel and Acts came to be written. We know that Paul was under arrest for 2 years in each of 2 places, in Caesarea and Rome. We will see later that it was probably during these times that Luke composed his 2-volume work, the Gospel in Caesarea and Acts in Rome, where of course he could interview Paul at his leisure. Number 5. A writer. Luke writes in an educated, polished Greek similar to that of Hellenistic historians. His skill as a writer will be examined when we consider Luke and Acts in more detail. His account of the shipwreck in Malta has been acclaimed as one of the masterpieces of literature from the ancient world. He has a good vocabulary, an excellent style, and an ability to hold the reader's interest, with a smooth and speedy switch from one plot to the next. His skill as a historian is also evident. His research is thorough and he knows what to include and what to leave out. Number 6. An evangelist. Luke was an evangelist, with his pen rather than his voice. Salvation is a key word in both books. That word and its cognates are used repeatedly. As a Gentile, Luke is especially concerned that salvation comes to all flesh. In his Gospel he records John the Baptist's quotation from Isaiah, "And all flesh shall see the salvation of God," and many have seen this as the key theme of the Gospel of Luke. We will see later in our study of the Gospel how Luke has particular interest in various groups of people who can and will see the salvation of God. Similarly, the theme of Acts is the Holy Spirit poured out on all flesh, on Jews, on Samaritans, unto the ends of the earth. This Jewish religion is for everybody in the whole wide world. Luke portrays Jesus as the Saviour of the world. History records that Luke died at the age of 84 in Boeotia in Greece, having never married. The audience. Having looked at the writer, let us turn now to the audience he was writing for in his 2-volume work. Luke wrote these volumes for one man, Theophilus, which literally means Mr. God-friendly. It seems strange that he should spend 4 years researching in order to write for just one person, even if he did think there might be a wider audience one day. Who was this man Theophilus? One theory is that Theophilus is a fictional figure, just as an author might write a book for an imaginary representative of a group, dear Mr. Sincere Inquirer. So Theophilus is a made-up name, God-friendly meaning somebody who is interested in the faith and wanting to find God. However valid the theory, however, it does not fit all the facts. Others argue that he was a real person, probably a publisher interested in Christianity. An intriguing idea, certainly. It is indeed better to see Theophilus as an individual who really did exist. He was obviously a man of some importance, in some public office, because Luke gives him a title as well as a name. Most excellent Mr. God-friendly. This is precisely the name title used for Festus and Felix when they proceeded over Paul's trials, strongly suggesting that Theophilus was in the legal profession, either a lawyer or a judge. Why, though, would Luke want to give a lawyer such a full account, first of Jesus and then of Paul? Paul's defence lawyer. If we imagine that Theophilus is Paul's defence lawyer, or even his judge at the trial in Rome, then it becomes clear. Either would need to have a full brief detailing the circumstances leading to the trial. How did this new religion start? Who was the founder? How did Paul come to be part of its propagation? Furthermore, the lawyer would be especially interested in how this faith was viewed by the Roman authorities. So, when Paul was imprisoned in Caesarea, Luke researched the life and death of Jesus, and when Paul was moved to prison in Rome, he did all the research and recording of Paul's contribution to this new religion. His work includes traces of him having interviewed a number of people we know to be important in the New Testament church. James, probably Matthew, and certainly John. There are some things in Luke that are only otherwise found in John. For example, he and John are the only two to record the cutting off of Malchus's ear during the arrest of Jesus. Compilation of the books. Luke had certain disadvantages when it came to collecting the necessary material for the defence brief. He was not one of the 12, he had never met Jesus, and he was not an eyewitness of his life and ministry. But he overcame these difficulties by visiting those who were eyewitnesses. He collected the accounts about Jesus while he was waiting for 2 years in Caesarea, until Paul was shipped to Rome. When Paul arrived in Rome, there were another 2 years during which Luke could write up the story of Paul in his second volume, the Acts of the Apostles. If the notion of the defence brief is correct, it would explain so much in both volumes. It would explain why the Romans are portrayed as entirely sympathetic to this new religion throughout the 2 books, both in the trial of Jesus and in the trial of Paul. Luke includes 3 statements that the men are totally innocent. Pilate says 3 times that Jesus is innocent, and 3 times Roman authorities say Paul could have gone free if he had not appealed to Rome. So in both volumes, the trouble surrounding the Christian is not caused by Romans, but by Jews seeking to cause problems for this new faith. Eyewitnesses. A lawyer would require first-hand testimony, eyewitness accounts and carefully researched facts, presented in an orderly fashion. Both of Luke's volumes include careful dating by Roman events, e.g. Luke chapter 2 verse 1 and chapter 3 verse 1, and his introduction to Theophilus in his first volume confirms his purpose. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Therefore, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, it seemed good also to me to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been informed about. This wording certainly fits in with the type of material a lawyer would require. Focus on Paul. This theory also explains the unusual features of the second volume. Acts is known as the Acts of the Apostles, but it centres on just 2 of them, barely mentions others, and omits any reference to the majority. In addition, while Peter is the main character in the first 12 chapters, he disappears almost as soon as Paul is converted. The book then focuses almost exclusively on Paul, accounting for 2/3 of the account. This would seem an unusual proportion, unless the whole work was primarily intended to defend Paul and explain to the Roman authorities that there was nothing seditious or subversive about the new religion. Paul is thus depicted as a Roman citizen, innocent by Roman law and deserving a not guilty verdict on his trial. There is also an interesting difference to be noted from Jesus' trial in Jerusalem. He was innocent by Roman law, yet was crucified because of Jewish pressure. Paul, by contrast, is on trial in a place where the Jews could not influence the verdict. His appeal to Caesar precluded their interference. It explains too why Paul's testimony is given 3 times in the book of Acts. A little excessive. None of the other apostles give their testimony, unless it is because Paul is on trial, and it is vital that the lawyer hear what he said at every one of his previous trials, so that all of it can be used in evidence for him, and not against him. In addition, seeing Acts as a defence lawyer's brief helps explain why Acts finishes so abruptly. It stops with Paul awaiting trial. This also discredits other arguments for the purpose of Acts. If it was purely an account of Paul's life, this would be an odd place to finish. We know that Luke himself lived to the age of 84, so he was alive to record Paul's death if that had been his purpose with Acts. If, on the other hand, the purpose was legal, then the brief finishes as we would expect, with Paul awaiting trial. One final anomaly could clinch the matter. Why would Dr. Luke give so much space to such a detailed account of the shipwreck on Malta, if he was aiming to write a history of the early church? And why would he describe only this disaster at sea, since Paul had been through at least 3 others? Surely it was because he wished to highlight Paul's exemplary behaviour in not attempting to escape in the confusion, but instead saving the lives of all on board, including his Roman captors, who were responsible for delivering him safely to the Roman court. After recounting this heroic and patriotic effort, I can imagine the defence lawyer at Paul's trial concluding with the words, "I rest my case, Your Honour." Was this brief successful? All the evidence points to Paul being acquitted at his first trial in Rome. The letters he wrote to Timothy and Titus contain details which do not fit into his life before that, and so imply that he was freed. There is even a strong tradition that he achieved his ambition of reaching Spain. Some of the ancient churches in Spain claim that Paul was their founder. We cannot say for certain, but the evidence of tradition points to the fact that Paul was released at his first trial, but later re-arrested and then beheaded. Despite their ultimate outcome, it looks as if Luke's work was not wasted. If he wrote the 2 volumes primary to save Paul's life in that first trial, and thus free the apostle from more ministry, then he succeeded. Conclusion. We have focused here on Luke's concern for Paul, but it is also clear that the trial had repercussions for Christianity everywhere. It was not just Paul but Christianity that was on trial. What happened in Rome spread everywhere, so this was an important test case. Luke's 2 volumes could be called The History of Christianity Parts 1 and 2. They comprise a superbly written account covering a period of 33 years, from the beginning of Jesus' public ministry through to Paul's imprisonment or house arrest in Rome. It is full of unique information, so that the original reader and also later readers would know for sure what took place and how they should respond. Luke was doubtless aware that his work would interest a wider audience too, with the general public in Rome becoming aware of the amazing spread of Christianity. Soon it would no longer be seen as a sect of Judaism, but as an advancing universal and international faith, and it was becoming important news in Rome itself. Luke's work, therefore, was not just a defence brief, but a declaration of the faith, and as such was a crucial contribution to the mission among the Gentiles. His Gospel, therefore, is a piece of unique material, In the opening, he tells Theophilus that many others have drawn up accounts of what happened. He would have known about Mark, maybe Matthew, and possibly other records, but his own gospel is the fruit of wide-ranging original research, including interviews and verbatim accounts from eyewitnesses, all set within the context of the Roman world. He portrays the wide vista and then zooms in to focus on individuals. Despite the fact that Luke was not himself an apostle, there was never any doubt that Luke's Acts should be included in the New Testament canon. That is truly a mark of how the early church regarded this outstanding work, apostolic in content and authority if not in authorship.